On September 30, 1954, when the Pope addressed a delegation of participants in the 8th Congress of the WMA, the World Medical Association, he remarked, "According to the information you have communicated to us, you have added to the original program of this Congress the question of experimentation on living men." Actually, even if the topic was an addenda to a previous program, as all did of the WMA, it would have been expected that the resolution on human experimentation adopted by the 8th General Assembly had a longer meeting story of the WMA councils. At the difference of the General Assembly, which were meeting once a year, the Council used to meet 3 times a year, before and after each General Assembly, and another time in spring. So you can follow the development of the ideas. But on this topic, I found, however, only 2 references to human experimentation before. One year and a half before, there was a lecture by the active president of the WMA, Dr. Hurst from Holland, and the first reference is dated September 14, 1951, when the WMA Council met in Stockholm, Sweden. There, Dr. Paul Sibry, the French delegate, who served since the beginning on the board of the WMA Council and was chair of the Committee of Medical Ethics, transmitted a strange request coming from the French Academy of Medicine. According to him, the French Academy wished the WMA may consider formulating an additional paragraph to the International Code of Medical Ethics, adopted by the WMA in 1949, on the topic of human experimentation, regulating the issue for both peace and war times. Sibry added even that the Academy, impressed by the WMA International Code, believed that WMA was the most appropriate body to formulate such a paragraph. What a strange thing. From my research, indeed, Sibry, as chairman of the WMA Committee on Medical Ethics, was interested to add a paragraph to the International Code, adopted in London in 1949, and this for many years. But it was on the duties of the physician towards society and not on human experimentation. Moreover, from research on the archives of the French National Academy of Medicine, we know that indeed there was a discussion on the topic of human exploitation, but in 1952 and not in 1951. Moreover, when the Academy wanted to turn to an international organization on issues related to medical ethics, they usually turn to the WHO, the World Health Organization, and not to the WMA. So what is going on there? How do we arrive at the adoption by the 8th General Assembly of some preliminary guidelines on human experimentation 10 years before the Helsinki Declaration? What is the statute of these forgotten guidelines? Let's put aside for a moment the own politics of Sibry within the WMA Council and concentrate on the case of the French Academy of Medicine. Actually, we only know through some participant memos that there was a debate there, and even a heated debate. Actually, if one may say so, there is an empty box of archival material which is a silent witness of that too. The box is there in the archives of the French Academy with the name of the Committee on Human Experimentation on it, but the file is missing. It had disappeared. So indeed, it may have some interesting material. And so there are only these few lines published in the Bulletin of the Academy in late November 1952. So what happened? My paper is following the pioneer work of my colleagues, Christian Bonnat and Florian Schmalz, which permit to relate this debate in the assembly, in the academy, to a military trial, less known than the Nuremberg medical trial, the trial of Professor Bickenbach and Hagen, held in Metz, France, in December 1952. The work of Bonnat and Schmalz is mainly based on French military archives. I based my paper and my work also on the papers of Robert Weiss, who was a former deportee physician and later dean of the Strasbourg Medical School of Medicine. And his papers are deposited here in Haifa University. Bickenbach and Hagen, both defendants, had worked at the Reich University of Strasbourg and experimented on deportees from the Natzweiler Struthof concentration camp. Kept in jail in France, they were brought as witnesses at the Nuremberg medical trial. But the preparation of their own process took more time. According to a letter from Maurice Lepicard from the French National Academy of Medicine to Robert Weiss, sometime earlier in 1952, the Academy was asked by the President of the State Council of France to give its advice on the issue of human experimentation. The opinion of the Academy had been finally written by the General Secretary of the Academy and read in a public séance of the Academy before being printed in its bulletin. So it was public, these few lines. Briefly, in this text, the Academy distinguished between experiments intended to the benefit of specific sick people under certain conditions and experiments for other purposes which could not be performed but on volunteers informed and entirely free to give their consent to the experiment. Even if the Academy concluded that according to those criteria, the acts perpetrated on deportees during the Second World War were criminals, certain deportees like Weiss thought that it was not sufficient and were afraid that it was not sufficient to condemn Bickenbach and Hagen. And actually, the expert opinion collected for the trial of two French bacteriologists, Blanc and Jude, supported the fear of the deportees, receiving the subtle distinction between vaccination against and inoculation of the disease made by the defendants. From the correspondence of Weiss, it is obvious that there had been a movement among former deportees in order to be present at the trial and have the possibility to give their own testimony, representing no less expertise as professor of medicine, but also the victim's point of view. Weiss testified on December 20, 1952. Apparently, only drafts of his testimony survived. But no less interesting regarding the ethics of human experimentation is a letter he sent the day after to the president of the tribunal. I'm quoting. "Yesterday, I said that an infection by typhus, even a mild one, on a deportee may have signified for him condemnation to death, being his lowest state of health. But while leaving the audience, I asked myself again about the potential danger for an individual living under normal conditions and free to be inoculated with a high dose of virulent virus." And here Weiss is quoting the quantities according to an article published by Hagen himself about his experiments. These are the quantities inoculated by Hagen to the 2-pack of gypsies, vaccinated and not vaccinated. In order to answer this question, there is only one way. Would I be ready to inoculate to myself such a quantity of viruses? My answer is obvious, no. And Weiss continues, "May I ask you, with all respect, Mr. President, to ask the experts these questions. Would you be ready to inoculate to yourself these virulent cultures?" I think that this letter is saying a lot about the ethics of human experimentation. And so, having found these forgotten guidelines from the WMA dated 10 years before the Helsinki Declaration, and tried to understand their background, I was not only brought back to French medical politics between the French delegate at the WMA and the French National Academy of Medicine. I was brought back to the Metz military trial and to a debate in medicine between experts that never experienced the camp experience and those who have passed through it and survive. And I think that this is the point which is connected with what we are doing here and medicine after the Holocaust. Thank you.